Hello everyone, this is MC Deck Discussions and I'm Abi Small, and today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about a villain, Klaw in particular, as an example with regard to my playtesting. So this is just in case some of you are curious about why I decide on a particular villain as my first villain for playtesting decks, or perhaps you want to compare to what you do, and I'm happy to have conversations in the comments for how you might playtest your decks, or maybe you don't playtest your decks at all, but you are curious about what it is that I do when I make these deck discussion videos, or the deck discussion videos. All right, let's get started. So first of all, for playtesting a hero, these are just some possible criteria for choosing a first villain. And when I first chose this villain, I didn't know this is why I chose them. It's just something I thought about afterwards. So for me in particular, Klaw then represents an example just for some considerations for deck testing. So let's go ahead and look at Klaw. So Klaw represents for me an enemy that I know. So it allows me to focus on my hero. So when I play against Klaw, I know how Klaw works. Now, if you're brand new, there might not be any villains that you're real familiar with, but I tend to play the same villains pretty frequently. And even if I didn't, when I'm playtesting a deck, I would have won at least my first villain to be one I'm really familiar with, because the goal for me is to focus on my deck, not on the villain. So if I have this real deep knowledge of the villain's cards and their mechanics, then I don't have to worry about those kind of things, and I can focus instead on my own hero and how they perform and what their mechanics are. So Klaw is an example, excellent example for me personally, right? So I know his deck well, I know how he plays, I know the variations, and it lets me focus in on my own deck strengths and weaknesses and what it is that I might want to change. So first of all, I do a warm-up play. So I personally like to do a standard play and then an expert play. And so the standard play for me is the warm-up play. So I'm going to build confidence in my deck, get my initial insights about my deck. And so I want it to, so for me, Klaw in particular, on this warm-up play on standard, this is a reliable way to refamiliarize myself with Klaw's deck. And then also at the same time be able to get familiar with my own hero. So that way, when I do go to play an expert, I've already had this practice run, and I don't have to think about Klaw's deck as much anymore. It also, this consistency in defeating a familiar villain is, or I should say, it's a familiar villain that I expect to defeat in standard mode. So again, it lets me focus in on the game, playing the villain, playing my deck. Okay. So that's what Klaw is for, so that initial feel. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. So then beyond that baseline, I want to push my deck's limits, so that's why I go to expert. So expert Klaw, right, has some extra possibilities in it, right? You have the immortal Klaw that gets added, so now you have two side schemes. And you're now an expert, so you have to deal with the expert mode. But in addition to that, this allows me to really test, did I put into my deck the things that I meant to put into my deck, right? So first of all, again, he's a familiar villain, so I know how difficult he can be. And he can also be at times easier too. So that's a conversation I've had with Daring Lime before, which is what has made me actually create a what am I saying? Oh, a house rule, so that I can get some more consistency when I play an expert. So I actually want my expert mode with Klaw to be more challenging, because I want to test my deck a little bit more before I go to other villains that I might want to, that I'm then going to test my deck in other ways. So because of that, I have then made sure I'm going to put in this house rule that gives me a certain level of difficulty. Now, you don't have to do that. And in fact, one of the things I actually like about Klaw is his variation in difficulty. I like that kind of surprise. So I don't do it when I do this house rule when I'm in standard, right? So let's take a look at this house rule. So I want to guarantee that I have a formidable start in expert. when I'm playing my new deck, right? I've already tested it in standard. And so the way it works is, if I get a Masters of Evil minion in play, then I just leave it. However, this is my setup rule for if I don't, right? So during Klaw's final setup step, right, what you're supposed to do is you discard cards from his deck until a minion shows up in your discard pile. Then you go ahead and put that into play. I realize this says revealed, but it shouldn't. They're not revealed. They're just put into play, right? But if it's not a Masters of Evil minion, then I search the encounter deck for a Masters of Evil minion and put it into play. So a lot of times that would be Melter that I would choose, but you could choose anything else, and a person could always change the rule to have it be somebody other than Melter, of course, as well. So then I shuffle the original card that showed up, so in this case, maybe it was Weapons Runner, back into the encounter deck, right? But then there are other ways to do this. Suppose you wanted a more consistent view, and maybe you only want to play the game in standard. I played the game for a long time just in standard before I started playing in expert. I found standard plenty challenging when I first started playing. And so perhaps you want a more consistent gameplay, but that isn't necessarily as challenging. So maybe Melter shows up, and instead you go and search the deck for Weapons Runner and then shuffle Melter back into the deck. So that could make it less challenging. Or perhaps, like me, you actually really do like that varied challenge. So when I play on standard, I like that varied challenge, that kind of, oh my God, if I get that 7-cost one that shows up, versus being relieved if I have, that lesser minion, one of the mercenary minions, right? So the takeaway here is, you can customize your playtesting approach in any way that fits your needs, right? So the key is finding what it is you're planning on evaluating. Some of you, like I said, might not even want to playtest your deck. You're just going to play it and have some fun. And that's fine. But if you do want to playtest them, then here are some ideas that you might want to consider. Klaw is just meant to be a case study here. I'm not saying that Klaw is perfect as a playtester, so I like him. He works for me as my first one of the villains I play. Typically right now I will go against 4 different villains, but Klaw makes a good playtest villain for me because he meets my criteria, but your criteria may differ. And, overall, the main thing is for your enjoyment of the game, right? And so this is what helps me enjoy the game and helps me to play test the game for my videos as well. So whatever works for you is really the goal. And hopefully you enjoyed just seeing some of the criteria that I use, and maybe it's something you might want to consider yourself. All right, that's it for today. Have a great one, everybody. Oh, be sure to like and subscribe if you appreciate some of this type of videos. And I'll talk to some of you in the chat. Bye. In the comments, that is.